Rain swept across the open plains in long silver cords, blurring the line between sky and earth until everything was one vast trembling mirror. The land smelled of wet sage and gunpowder from a far-off storm. Somewhere in that endless gray, a woman stumbled through the mud, one hand gripping her side, the other pressed against the swell of her belly. Each step was an act of defiance. Her breath came shallow, visible even in the rain's breathless chill. The horizon offered nothing but emptiness, and still she walked, as if the motion itself could keep her alive. When the cabin appeared through the mist, it looked less like a refuge and more like a forgotten grave, its wooden ribs bowed and shivering in the wind. She hesitated at the door, her vision flickering. The air tasted of iron. Blood had seeped through the cloth tied around her thigh. She lowered herself to the floor, too weak to knock. Mud streaked her legs, rain trickled from her hair onto the warped boards. The child inside her shifted, a reminder that surrender was not yet permitted. She whispered something in her native tongue, a prayer to whatever spirit watched lost women. Hoofbeats broke the rhythm of the rain. Slow, heavy, measured. The door creaked open, spilling in a pale wash of daylight. A tall figure filled the frame, a man carved from silence and weather. His hat dripped, his coat glistened like oilskin. He took in the sight of her without a word, eyes tracing the wound, the exhaustion, the defiance that still lived in her posture. His face was neither cruel nor kind. It simply carried the knowledge of too many storms survived. "You're coming with me," he said at last. The woman flinched, misreading command for threat. Her fingers tightened around a shard of broken pottery near her knee. He saw it didn't move. The rain's whisper filled the pause between them, thin and endless. Then he crouched, boots sinking into the wet floorboards. His voice softened, lower than thunder, steadier than mercy. "You'll die here if you stay." Her eyes flicked to the open door behind him, the wild plains, soaked and pitiless. She could see no safety there, only the ghost of her tribe's campfires, snuffed out days ago. Her breath trembled. "I don't know you." He nodded once, as if that fact weighed the same to him as the rain. "Name's Eli Mercer," he said. "This cabin's mine, and you're bleeding through your binding." She tried to rise, but her legs buckled. He caught her before she hit the ground. She resisted at first, striking weakly at his chest, but his hold was careful, reverent almost. He lifted her like she was something fragile the world had forgotten how to handle. She could smell the leather on him, the faint trace of tobacco, the clean sting of rain. Outside, his horse waited, sides heaving, mane plastered dark against its neck. Eli eased her into the saddle, steadying her with one arm as he mounted behind. When the animal started forward, the motion rocked her into his chest. For the first time in days, she let her eyes close. The ride was long, a quiet rhythm of hooves through puddled grass and the hiss of water on stone. Eli said nothing. He didn't ask who she was or what she'd run from. The plains were full of ghosts. He'd learned not to name them. By the time they reached his cabin near the cottonwoods, dusk had crept down the hills. He carried her inside and laid her on the small bed near the hearth. The fire had long gone out, but he coaxed it back with dry shavings, his large hands unexpectedly gentle. When light bloomed again, she looked at him properly. His eyes were blue, faded like worn denim, ringed with lines that told of sleepless nights and debts unpaid. She spoke her name quietly, Ayanna, and closed her eyes as if offering it cost her strength. Eli cleaned her wound without comment. The sight of her pain made something in him shift, though he could not have said what. He'd buried his wife 3 winters ago. Since then, he'd spoken more to his horse than to any living soul. Yet this stranger's trembling hand against his sleeve stirred a long-dormant ache, the need to protect something still worth saving. Outside, the storm began to ease, but the cabin walls seemed to hold its echo. Each creak sounded like a question neither of them could answer. Ayanna stirred in her half-sleep, murmuring in a language Eli didn't know. He listened anyway, the melody haunting, soft as falling ash. Later, when he stepped out to fetch more wood, he saw lanterns flickering in the distance, too steady for lightning. Riders, perhaps. He felt his jaw tighten. Trouble often rode behind the lost. Back inside, the woman slept uneasily, the fire painting her face in gold and shadow. Eli lingered by the doorway, watching the rain slide off the roof in glimmering threads. Somewhere beyond the cottonwoods, a coyote called a long, mournful note that seemed to name them both. He removed his hat, let the water drip to the floor, and whispered almost to himself, "Reckon you've brought more than a storm, haven't you?" The flames flickered in reply, throwing his shadow tall against the wall beside hers. Two outlines joined by accident, framed in trembling light. The rain eased to a murmur. In that fragile hush, before the night claimed them completely, Eli Mercer realized the plains had not sent him another ghost. This one was still alive, and the world would come looking for her. He stared once more at the dim horizon through the cracked window and felt the faint pull of something unfamiliar, hope or maybe warning. He couldn't tell which, but he knew the moment wouldn't last. Morning came thin and colorless, the light crawling across the floorboards like a shy animal. Ayanna stirred, half dreaming, her hand instinctively resting on the swell of her belly. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and ash. Eli sat near the door, boots still muddy, rifle propped within reach. He hadn't slept. The faint trail of lanterns he'd seen in the night hadn't faded from his mind. Trouble had a way of finding the lost, and he could feel it circling already. When Ayanna opened her eyes, she found him watching the horizon through the cracked window. "They'll come," she said, voice rough from sleep and memory. He turned to her, expression unreadable. "Who?" She hesitated, swallowing the fear like something bitter. "Men who took from my people. They want what they think I carry, something worth gold, maybe more." Her fingers trembled over her stomach, and Eli understood without her saying another word. It wasn't just her they wanted, it was what she carried within her. He stood slowly, the floor groaning under his weight. "Then we don't wait for them." But by noon it was too late. Dust bloomed on the far ridge, 3 riders, silhouettes cut sharp against the pale sky. Ayanna's breath hitched, panic flickering in her eyes. Eli felt the old instinct rise, the one he'd tried to bury since the war. The part of him that remembered violence not as glory, but as duty. He took the rifle from its hook and checked the chamber, fingers steady, as if they'd never forgotten. "They'll kill you for helping me," she whispered. "Maybe," he said, tightening the strap across his shoulder. "But I've been half dead for years. Might as well finish something that matters." The riders dismounted a short distance from the cabin, mud splattering their boots. One, broad and scarred, called out, "We're just looking for what ain't his to keep." His grin was wolfish. "You seen a woman half-blood hurt bad." Eli stepped onto the porch, rain starting again in a fine drizzle. "Ain't seen anyone worth your kind's attention," he said evenly. The men exchanged glances. The leader's grin widened. "Careful, Cowboy. No use lying. We've been told she was headed this way. You do better hand her over before things get ugly." Eli's reply was quiet enough that the rain almost stole it. "Things already are." Ayanna stood inside, clutching the edge of the window, her pulse echoing in her ears. She saw the shape of Eli's shoulders against the gray light, massive, unmoving. The outlaws laughed, a cruel sound that curdled the air. Then the first man raised his rifle. The world cracked open. Ayanna screamed a warning as the shots split the stillness. Eli moved faster than she thought possible, dropping to one knee and firing once, the sound rolling across the plains like thunder. One of the men fell. The others scattered behind their horses. The cabin walls shook with return fire. Splinters flew. Ayanna crawled to the hearth, where another rifle leaned. Her hand shook, but instinct guided her. Through the smoke and rain, Eli shouted, "Stay down." But she didn't. When the leader aimed at the door, she rose, bracing the rifle against a windowsill. Her shot cracked the glass, striking the outlaw's arm and sending his weapon spinning into the mud. He roared in pain, staggering back. Eli used the distraction, stepping forward into the storm. He disarmed the last man with a single blow, then pressed his boot to the leader's chest. "Leave her," he said, "and tell whoever sent you there's nothing here worth dying for." The man spat blood, muttering something ugly, but Eli's gaze made him falter. The surviving riders dragged their wounded comrade to his horse and retreated, swallowed by the rain's haze. Eli stood there long after they vanished, breathing hard, the rifle hanging limp in his hand. Inside, Ayanna sank to the floor, shaking. The rifle slipped from her grasp. Eli entered a moment later, soaked to the bone, eyes heavy with the cost of what had just passed. For a long time, neither spoke. Only the fire whispered, filling the silence with the soft hiss of survival. He knelt beside her. "You shouldn't have stood up," he said, though his voice held no anger. "I couldn't let you die for me," she murmured, tears mixing with rain on her cheeks. He looked at her for a long time before answering. "Seems we both ain't used to being saved." The words hung between them, fragile and unfinished. He touched her shoulder, the contact brief, but steady, grounding. The tension slowly drained from her body, leaving only exhaustion. Outside, the last of the rain began to fade, and a pale band of sunlight touched the horizon. Later, as the storm scent lifted, Eli repaired the broken window. Ayanna watched him work, her heart a quiet drum. In the faint light, he looked older but softer, like the land itself had forgiven him something. She realized she no longer felt hunted, only weary and oddly safe. When he finished, he set the hammer down and looked out toward the horizon. The clouds were pulling apart, revealing the bruised blue of evening. "You'll need to rest a few days," he said. "After that, we'll figure what comes next." Ayanna studied him, the man who had no reason to help her, and yet had stood between her and death. "And if they come again?" Eli's gaze stayed on the distance. "Then I reckon they'll find we're still standing." For a heartbeat, silence held the room. The fire snapped softly, and the faint call of a coyote carried through the wet air. Ayanna exhaled, her hand tracing slow circles over her stomach, the life within her calm now. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time, she believed she might see it. Eli turned, catching her eyes. Something unspoken passed between them, gratitude, fear, something gentler still. Outside, the last drops fell from the eaves like tears the sky no longer needed to hold. The plains, washed clean, waited in quiet promise. And within the flicker of that fragile peace, neither of them noticed how the storm had already begun to move on.